I'll I'll try to start sharing the screen.
Okay, I will do a brief introduction at the beginning, and then you can start your presentation. And then I will ask students if they have any questions, they should just put it in the chat, and then we can address all the questions at the end.
Okay. Are you seeing the PowerPoint?
I don't see right now, but when you just first shared it, I was able to see the slide. I don't see anything right now.
So I'll try again because it was going on the wrong screen.
Okay. I can see your slides right now. Yeah, I can see them.
Okay, good. You probably recognize that satellite. Yeah, that's the Hubble Space Telescope. Before that's with the original solar panels. They were changed in one of the servicing missions.
You have a lot of pictures of space, like related to space. Okay. I'm gonna wait for like a couple of minutes so people can join, and then we can start. Okay, I think I'm gonna start, and then when people gonna join, they can ask any questions, whatever they missed at the beginning. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us virtually, and I'm so excited to host the fourth feature in our International Student Speaker Series with my fellow SAESAC member, Ricky Roy. If you haven't already, make sure to tune into our prior conversations now on YouTube on SAESAC GT channel. I am Kira Vidyanina, and I'm a member of the School of Aerospace Engineering Student Advisory Council, which I joined in May 2020. I'm currently a junior and an undergraduate researcher at the Aerospace Systems Design Lab at Georgia Tech, and I'm also an international student from Kazakhstan who came to the United States with dreams of creating and developing highly efficient and ecology-friendly propulsion systems. To all the international students joining our event, I would like to open by saying that I empathize with you. I know it's challenging being a foreign national in the aerospace industry in any country. And the main goal of our series is to bring professionals from all over the world who have experience with international student-friendly companies to share their personal and professional experiences. With this, we hope to connect our international students to opportunities in the United States and across the world. This event is intended to be for international students of all levels, from undergraduate to Ph.D., interested in breaking into the space industry in the United States. For future events, we will be bringing in speakers from both aviation and space companies and agencies across different disciplines. And I'm honored to introduce our fourth guest, Massimo Stiavelli. Dr. Massimo earned his Ph.D. in physics at Scuola Normale Superiore of Pisa in 1986. He also did postdoctoral work at Rutgers University and was a fellow at the European Southern Observatory in Garching. In 1995, he joined the Space Telescope Science Institute in Baltimore, where he is currently an astronomer and mission head of the James Webb Space Telescope. His main scientific interest is the formation and evolution of galaxies, both from the point of view of theory and observations. Dr. Stiavelli was the team lead for the Hubble Ultra Deep Field, and he has authorized or co-authorized more than 140 research papers in professional journals and a cosmology book on First Light and Reionization. He has served on and chaired numerous NASA committees, and he is an interdisciplinary scientist on the science working group of the James Webb Space Telescope. And last but not least, Massimo is a member of the American Astronomical Society and the International Astronomical Union, and a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And on this note, I would like our guest to start this presentation. And if any of our participants have any questions, please type them in the box, and we will address them later.
Thank you for having me. I'll try to proceed at a good pace so that we can leave room for questions. The outline of what I'm going to talk about is give you a brief idea of who I am, describe different perspective in when you're studying, when you're looking for a job, when you have a job, and draw some conclusions. So everything I say should be taken as an example. I don't know that one could generalize a recipe that works for everybody. These are things that work for me, may not work for others, and also the outcomes of actions are always modulated by external factors, and some of my experiences may be only relevant to the field, which is where I spend most of my life, which is astrophysics. I was born and raised in Italy. I did all my studies in Italy, but I spent multiple periods of time abroad as an undergraduate and as a graduate student. I think international experience is important, and among other things, it provides exposure to other realities and environments, which would be useful in life. I work at the Space Telescope Science Institute. This is an international organization. It's operated by a non-profit corporation called AURA, American Universities for Research in Astronomy. It's on the campus of Johns Hopkins University. And we have staff from the European Space Agency, the Canadian Space Agency, and NASA. It's a freestanding science operation center, and we operate the Hubble Space Telescope. We also are preparing for the flight and science operations of the James Webb Space Telescope, and we are preparing for the Roman Space Telescope. So, what should one do as a student? I think that it's right to think about regular curriculum studies up to and including the Ph.D. as steps, not as the arrival point. Degrees are like keys that you need to open certain doors, but your learning will not stop there. A broad foundation is important because you don't know what skills you'll need. So good math foundation is good because math is useful almost everywhere. A good programming foundation helps you. And often I found that people that have one computing language that they are comfortable with is important. Because sooner or later you need to write code, and often one would need to learn more than one language. And it's also useful to have good written English skills because most jobs require writing reports, writing proposals, either for research or for missions or for projects or internal funding. So having good written English skills, I'm assuming that we are talking about jobs that are ultimately in the United States, it's a good set of skills. And I always found that, I'll try to move my little window somewhere else, that learning new things on the job is important and you could argue essential. There are two types of people, broadly speaking. There are folks that like to become super specialists in one field. You are, the super expert in some usually small area, or there are others who get bored and like to change. I was more in this class. And for these people, the ability and interest in learning new things is even more important. I assume that maybe system engineers come from this second class, but I don't see myself as a system engineer. So as an international student, I think it is useful to understand whether you want to live in the US in the long term or go back to your native country or some other country. And these might affect choices. And this comes a bit from experience. When I was a postdoctoral fellow in the US, I felt I did not take full advantage of the opportunities because I was thinking of in terms of the thing that I would need to do to be in a better situation back home in Italy. And in hindsight, I missed opportunities that would have been made it easier to come back to the US. Another consideration for international students is that ITAR and EAR, which is International Traffic in Arms Regulation, and I don't remember EAR, can seriously limit areas where non-US persons, so people that are neither citizens nor green card holders, can work. These may restrict employers or fields. And it is also largely, I would say, organization dependent. So at the Space Telescope, for instance, we are willing to do the paperwork that is needed to support non-US persons when legally possible. Not all countries are treated the same by laws and regulations, so in some cases it's maybe easier than in others. But we normally do the paperwork that is needed. Other organizations don't want to deal with it. So that's another factor to consider. The space sector is heavily affected by ITAR and EAR, and even SpaceX, for instance, in some of their activities is constrained by these laws and regulations. They should be taken seriously because there are people who ended up in jail for violating ITAR. But also, on the positive side, many fields are free from ITAR. For instance, in astronomy, which is my field, if you work on ground-based instrumentation, which is not probably what most of you are immediately thinking about doing, is largely unaffected, although probably not completely. And so my solution to this problem was to become a permanent resident and later a citizen. Another thing that is interesting coming from abroad is that there are certainly cultural differences. Personally, I didn't encounter real barriers moving to the US, but this could be a consequence of my specific circumstances. Also, the US outlook has changed a lot in the last 20 years. In any case, I think it's important to be mindful of the environment where you live. Sometimes folks who just came from abroad can step into a cultural minefield, not knowing how the average person nowadays would react to something that they do or say, and that to them appears perfectly fine. So the other thing to consider, of course, is that there is no average person in the US, like there is no average person anywhere else. And so you'll find a range of backgrounds, identities, cultures, and this range of backgrounds is probably wider in the US than elsewhere. So it is even more important to be mindful and avoid offending people without meaning to. Perfectly fine to offend if you mean to, but you should also be cautious in that. So one aspect that I thought is very important, and I brought it up in the beginning because I learned it personally a bit late, is that it's mentorship. And I find that it is important to have a mentor. And that is somebody that has already been through what you're about to tackle, and that and with whom you can share thoughts and ideas. I think that it is essential to trust your mentor completely, and this may drive your choice of a mentor in the sense that a more junior mentor that you trust may be more useful to you than a more senior person that you don't trust completely. Also, in many organizations, I don't know about Georgia Tech, but I know of organizations that have organized mentorship. So people are assigned mentors of the basis of some institutional criteria, and so that some institutional box can be checked. I'm personally skeptical about this process just because I think the match of personalities is very important. So even if you are in a place where you have an institutional mentor, if you don't find that there is a perfect match with that person, I would consider looking for another person that you trust. And talking to two people wouldn't hurt. I also find that mentorship is a two-way road in the sense that at every stage in your studies and later in your career, you'll have people that were already there some time ago, and people that are trying to follow you. And so you can be mentored by the ones that are ahead of you and mentor yourself those who are following you. And the act of mentoring people actually helps clarify what you want or what you find beneficial in a mentor. And also, even if your advisor or supervisor or mentor, whoever, gave you bad advice for whatever reason, you can learn from that and provide better advice to the others. And so to use an overused sentence, a good way to see mentorship is leaving the world a better place than you found it. Try to help the others and help if you can. So another aspect of which is related to human nature is that of networking. And certainly one of the main reasons for attending professional conferences, I think, is networking. You probably don't need to attend a conference to find out what's new nowadays. Of course, this is much harder in a work-from-home situation when most conferences are virtual. In conferences, when they are not virtual, I found that it's very important to have an advisor or a mentor that can break the ice and introduce you to other people that are well established in the field. And if they're not doing it, you should politely ask them to do it, and maybe you should think about looking for another mentor. So by now I try to do it without being asked. Certainly I've lived on the other side when I was wishing that my advisor or mentor would introduce me more to people. Knowing established people is important. It may depend a bit on the field, but certainly it increases the chances that they might become interested in your work or even notice your work. They may become collaborators. They may hire you. And in many fields and jobs, references are important. They may be formal reference letters or just a phone call. Depends on the field. And the more people know your work, the more people may write a letter or provide a reference. And the only note of caution on networking is that I would focus on professional events, doing a conference, and be cautious about post-conference parties, for instance. I know many people that would not consider attending parties as part of their personal policy, not to confuse personal life with professional life. And so I would be skeptical of anybody who would want to talk about hire or discuss science or engineering in a party. Internship is another thing that can be very useful and to expand your network, complement your studies, get experience, understand whether you like a certain type of work. And many large companies in the aerospace sector have internships. And I think many of them, but not all of them, are at the graduate level. At STSCI, we have summer studentships that are advertised early every year, and they allow engagement both with engineering and science. Often we accept both graduate and undergraduate students, and we can have more ad hoc internships. And we normally advertise ours on the American Astronomical Society job register and on our website, if anybody is interested. One thing that is very useful, both as a student and later on, it's planning. I think that very good planning is very important. And by good planning, I mean that you need to identify goals that are realistic, and those goals should be not too hard, not too easy. And because if they are too hard, you won't achieve them and you'll be frustrated. If they're too easy, you won't be pushing yourself enough. So you'll need realistic steps to achieve those goals, and realistic steps would require serious work, but possibly they will leave you time to enjoy life a little bit. So breaking down a problem, whatever that problem is, graduating, completing a project, into small tasks, and planning how to do them is a big confidence builder, and I think overall increases the chances of success. It's also good to know yourself and whether or not multitasking is something that you can do. There are people who boast about their great abilities of multitasking. At the same time, there is a literature of people that argue that nobody is actually good at multitasking. I think it's a balance, and you have to determine whether multitasking can work in some sense for you. And this will drive what type of plans are best for you. Still be aware that most people are best when they focus on one thing, and even those that consider themselves good at multitasking can perform better when they're focused on one thing. So, for instance, I believe I can do reasonably well at multitasking, but some time ago when I was writing what I thought was a very important proposal, I allocated time, and for a period of, I think, almost 2 months, I did not do anything except that. And I think that's probably what you would want to do if there is something which is hard and important. Another angle that is talked a lot these days is work-life balance. And I'm not probably somebody who should talk a lot about that because, I got married at 41 and my first kid at 42. This work-life balance is very personality dependent. I'm happy of never being off the grid. I like to check email all the time, and I actually could get anxious if I don't know what the new email coming in says. I, for instance, use an app on every device so that if I think of something, wherever I have access to a computer, a phone, or an iPad, I have that app and I can take notes on it and find them afterwards. I don't enjoy very much going on vacation, because especially if it forces me to go off the grid. And so I'm the guy for whom work from home was designed. It's great for me to be here, don't have distractions, don't have to drive anywhere. Probably I'm not typical. So the work-life balance that works for somebody may not work for other people. The way we handle this with people who work with me is that we become aware of each other's preferences. So, for instance, if I think of something on a Saturday evening, I like to get it out of my system, and I will email somebody asking, why don't you do this? They know that they shouldn't react, that it's okay waiting till Monday. So they can get their work-life balance, and I can get my mind off the thing and get mine too. In general, obviously, these things are different for different people, but whatever your thing is, you should find the circumstances that make you the most productive, effective, and motivated. One of my best students ever had to cut work and take maybe a week off where he wouldn't even check email. And so that's what worked for this person. So there are people who need to recharge, and there are other people that don't as much. So whatever it is, you need to figure out both what works best for you, and when you start interacting with other people, realize that these other people may benefit from different behaviors from yours. And so, of course, you need to accommodate these different ways of interacting and behaving. And possibly with a good compromise that doesn't force anyone to bend too much to the needs of the other side. It is also important in your career to set clear expectations with those that work with you. And ideally, maybe those expectations should be clarified before accepting a job or a role. So, and I've met people who were themselves very hardworking, dedicated, 24/7, and these people grow frustrated when they work with somebody, with a junior collaborator who only works 50 hours a week. So from the point of view of the junior collaborator, they were already doing more than expected, but from the point of view of the more senior person, they were slackers. So it's important to spell out expectations. And I've known also brilliant students who became demotivated because their advisors were not challenging them enough. Again, it's a mismatch in expectations. So the mismatches of expectations are among the trickiest thing. So at some point, you'll be looking for a job. One interesting thing is, what field do you choose? My personal path was to start out as a theoretical astrophysicist. I like math a lot. So I thought, well, I like physics. Astrophysics seems interesting. I didn't like the idea of working in a huge team, at the time at least. And so I thought astrophysics, maybe a small group can do good things and be a theoretical astrophysicist. And then when I was at the European Southern Observatory in Garching in Germany, I became interested in observations, learned a bit of a few techniques. And at a time when the theory in my field was a little bit stuck, I got more and more interested in observations, moved to Baltimore, and ended up supporting some of the instruments from the Hubble Space Telescope. So I learned something about hardware. And then I got involved into building instruments for Hubble and had to learn even more about hardware. And throughout this, even though what I was doing at every single time, I was still motivated by my goal, which is to learn how galaxies form and evolve. So in a way, I had a long-term goal, but different tools to achieve that goal as time goes on. So if I had to generalize from my personal experience, I would say that certainly different people are propelled by different things. There are those like me that are interested in solving a problem and like to learn whatever it takes to reach that goal. And I met other people, equally successful, who are fascinated by a technique. They don't care much about the problem. They have a hammer and they look for all the nails that they can hammer with that. So that's also another viable approach, and it's probably personality-based. Both can be successful, and science and technology rely on teams, and so these type of skills can be complementary. And when you work with others, you have to be aware of that, and I think it would be useful for you to understand what drives you, so that you can, pursue the course of action that interests you the most. So in terms of the real career path, I think it's very hard to generalize because, of course, there are motivations, interests, and then reality, and somewhere you'll have to the two interact. So, for instance, I liked a lot to teach, but ended up leaving a teaching job to become an instrument scientist at the Space Telescope, where I don't teach. So the place was more interested for astronomy, so I gave up something I like for something that I found at that time more interesting. So in general, when you apply for jobs, it's good to have, it's a little bit like applying for college in the US. You have to have a stretch goal and some easier ones, so a backup plan. So look for things that you would really like to get, but perhaps they are more competitive, and also some others that are still good enough, but maybe easier to get. It's always good to have a backup plan. It's also useful to take advantage of informal networks that are now available to make sure that you're not walking into a toxic environment. Because I've known people that went to very good places and then they discovered that the senior person they had to work with was not a very good person. So being there was, in fact, worse than going to a less famous place with better people. And a good mentor may help even in this type of things. So one thing that this might even be more specific to astronomy than some of the other things I've said, but it may be applicable elsewhere. I just don't know. Is the multi-step strategy. In fact, I should say I know of people that have applied it in aerospace engineering as well. So if you cannot, for whatever reason, get the job you want right away, you could look at it as a ladder. Get somewhere, first step, and then try to climb the ladder up to that job that you really want. And in some places, this is, you work on something which is soft money, so contract or grant-based with a well-respected person. And this may give you a lot of visibility in a few years because the work that you'll be able to do with this person is noticed, and you have an extra person that will become a supporter and provide strong references. And certainly I've known these people that use this to get prize fellowship after a grant-funded one. Another one is get a more junior position that you might be able to get, but in a very good place, in order to get, instead of a more senior position in a less interesting place, and that will be a stepping stone. So two examples. One is a famous physicist, John Archibald Wheeler, who was offered at some point two jobs, an assistant professor in Princeton and an associate professorship in another university I won't mention. And he, after a lot of thinking, decided to go to Princeton. And that was a very good choice, it turns out. That's where he met his teaching assistant, Richard Feynman, and he did a lot of good research and became famous. I know a colleague of mine did exactly the same thing, got a junior position in Cambridge in the UK, did some good work with a very famous person, and he was hired afterwards in his dream job in California. And the other thing is to consider all options, laboratories, universities, industries, for various reasons. One is that not everybody will thrive anywhere, but everybody will thrive somewhere. So you have to find what is the place that works best for you. And I've met all kinds of people that in some cases, if your interests are very different from where you started, it may take more time. I met a person that started with a physics degree, went to work in industry, and is now a professional violin player. So that type of path takes a little longer to unfold, but ultimately he found this calling. Again, mentors and knowledge of yourself will help. And I met people that went in both directions, started in academia, left, went to industry, and others that decided that academia was what they liked, even if they were paid less, and people that came back from industry to academia. So you can have everything is possible. You just need to understand what it is that you like, really. So once you have a job, what do you do? So one thing that is a cause of friction very often is communications or lack thereof. There is a saying that says the biggest misconception about communication is that it has happened. So most friction between people are due to miscommunications. Unclear expectations is one that I mentioned earlier, is one example of bad communications. A quick word in the corridor between busy people is also rife from misunderstandings and bad communications. Both may have different things in mind, and that word could be misinterpreted. So it is important to communicate effectively, which of course includes listen, not only talk. And I would recommend to follow up on all important verbal communications with an email. I've always found that very effective. You talk to somebody about a common problem or a task, and then you write, once you get back to your office, "Dear X, following our conversation, I want to confirm that we agreed on this. I'll do this, and you'll do that. Please let me know if I misunderstood." So that will create a paper record that will clarify what it is exactly what was discussed in person. And it's good to talk in person first and not start with the email, but after you talk in person, capture it in an email. And that this approach reduces the chances of misunderstandings, what I call good faith misunderstandings, because of course there may be misunderstandings that are not in good faith. And so if that's the case, they will provide you with a written record that you can appeal to. As I hinted earlier, never discuss a potentially controversial issue by mail first. It's important to talk to people because there are nonverbal forms of communications that when you talk to people, you can notice, you can see how the person starts reacting. And so a situation that can spiral out of control by email may remain perfectly civilized in an in-person conversation. And then after the discussion, you send the email that captures the conclusions. So today, one speaks a lot about innovation. And just in my experience over many years, innovation is very powerful, but it's also hard to manage. I think that innovation works best when it's spontaneous. And so you need to create an environment, or you need to look for an environment where it can thrive. It's very hard to decide, okay, at 6 o'clock we'll start innovating till 7:30. That doesn't work very well. So when we were, as an example, when we were planning to operate the James Webb Space Telescope, the person who had my job at the time decided that even though it would have been easy for us to say, we do everything is the same as we do for Hubble. Hubble works, no reason to change. But this person looked at other ideas, carried out a number of studies, compared what we did with what other missions run by other people did. And in some cases, we kept our approach, and in some cases, we adopted the other people approach. This is important because a lot of people suffer from the not invented here syndrome, that everything that your organization didn't create is not so good. And so showing everybody that he was serious about looking at what was best told people that he was serious about innovating. And years later, we were on the way with a schedule, requirement, and so on, and people became more conservative. They had pressing things to do. But some innovative ideas were still coming up, but it became harder and harder to put them through. And sometimes people were really resisting change. And in some cases, I really had to, when I saw something new, I really had to push to make it happen. At that point, I was the one in charge. And so at least it was on me to decide what was worth pursuing. And another thing that is an enemy of innovation is passive resistance. So people don't have the courage to tell you no, but they will just drag their feet all the way. And that is much harder to fight, and it makes innovation harder. So this is important both if you are the one that has innovative idea, or when you're more senior in an organization, when you are the one that wants to promote innovative ideas. So statistically, younger folks are more likely to have to be innovative, but this is not a strict rule. And some people prefer to do things differently, and other people prefer not to take that risk. So to some extent, this is also personal choice, and it is important for you to know what you're comfortable with. But if you believe in something and you want to do it, you should try to go ahead if the circumstances are right. And keeping in mind a few simple rules. If you have a working prototype, be that piece of hardware or code, it's easier to convince people. and also that some people will never be convinced. So you'll need to convince enough people. I remember a case where we were discussing a particular piece of hardware, and some senior engineer was saying, oh, yeah, that would be great, but it's not possible to make it. It cannot be manufactured. And the younger engineer went off and made it. So once you have it in hand, it's very hard to argue that it doesn't exist. Also, it's useful to find a high-level sponsor if you can, because often in my view, line or middle managers are too concerned about they are paid to push the thing through. And so sometimes they are not too interested in innovation. They're interested in meeting the milestone, the deadline. And higher level managers have a longer term view and may be more receptive to innovation. Not necessarily all of them, but certainly some of them. And sometimes an organization is just too inflexible for innovation, and a new organization needs to be created. So if you are in that situation, that's you need to realize it. It is interesting that how the PC was created is that the company that created it decided that it was easier to create a separate division to do it rather than try to build it within existing organizations. And the skunk works in some way are exactly the same thing, a separate thing where people that are creative work, and it is somehow separated from the main stream, even though people can transfer back and forth. So I added these just to highlight what I was saying. This is I got it from Wikipedia, but you find this kind of curve in many places. This is, when something new is introduced, there will be some people that they say here 2.5% that are the innovators. They are the ones that do it. Then you have the early adopters, then there is the early majority, then a late majority, and then there are people who will never adopt it. And so there are some folks that will never be convinced, and that's just a fact of life. But if the majority accepts it, you're done. So managing is another thing that you will suffer in two ways, as the person being managed and at some point as the person that manages it. At the Space Telescope, I had two management jobs. I was the imaging branch lead in the instrument division. This is a branch that was overseeing all the cameras on the Hubble Space Telescope, mostly at the time. So all the cameras that take the nice pictures from Hubble that you have seen. And I was mostly a people manager, not a technical manager in that branch. And nowadays, as mission head, I mostly manage work instead, not people. And these two types of management require incredibly different skill sets. I should know that when I remember what I said about my studies, I nowhere they included management. I started learning on the job, read books, took courses. And Space Telescope, in particular the mission office for James Webb, for instance, is a structure based on three people. A project scientist who has the goal, the task to worry about how to get the best science out of the mission. The project manager who has to worry about how to stay within the budget and schedule. And a mission head who mediates between the two. Sometimes you may want to go, break the schedule or go over budget in an area because the benefits for science will justify it. And other times you may decide that you will do something suboptimal because this remaining on schedule is important. And if you have a big enough field, you can balance, and going over budget in one area may allow, if you go under budget in one area, you may be able to go over budget in another. So that's essentially the trick in the job. As a manager, when you end up being a manager, I think is important to identify people that you trust and to delegate actual decisions to them. What I like to do, and I think it works reasonably well, is to make it clear that those that have this delegated power should feel free to come and ask when they're unsure about a decision, so it can be discussed together. But the byproduct is that if they take a decision that you don't like, you should not override it, because it would be devastating for their self-confidence and for the trust they have in the organization. So if you give somebody the power to take a decision, you should not take it away if you don't like the answer. That's why picking people that you trust is essential. So, a few tips. I was lucky, and I had a few extraordinary managers when I was, quote, growing up. So people that really make you think, wow, that's what I want to do. That's who I want to become. And it is important to watch the people around you to learn, and you can learn both positively and negatively. You can learn, oh, I want to do the same thing that this person does, and I want to do things differently from what this other person does. And these will allow you to find your style. The other thing that is very important, no matter what, is integrity. It is essential that people trust you, even if the news are bad in any circumstances. And that integrity comes also responsibility and a number of other qualities. It is essential to listen. I remember one of these extraordinary managers I was referring to who would very rarely speak. He was the one with the power, and he rarely said anything. He would listen. He would let the team reach a conclusion. And if the team didn't reach a conclusion or they were unsure, sometimes he would speak, but after having listened all sides, and normally that was the last word. Nobody would, that was it. No discussion. It's also important to be able to say I was wrong when that happens, and it tends to happen from time to time. And it is important, this was an area that I myself had to work on because it didn't come out naturally to me, to be generous with credit and understanding and considerate with blame. I didn't have the second problem, so I've always been considerate with blame, but, surrounded by good people that I trusted, took some effort to learn to teach myself to give credit when they did the good job that I was expecting them to do. The fact that you expected them to do a good job doesn't mean that they don't like to be told that they did a good job. So being generous with credit is very important. And another thing that over the years I've thought is important is ask yourself what are the motivations for becoming a manager. Some people unfortunately want to become managers because they like the idea of having some form of power over people, or they are themselves insecure, and I think that those are terrible reasons to do it. The desire to serve the organization's best interest is probably the best reason. And I would put the desire of getting paid more somewhere in between those two. So I mentioned earlier constant learning, and I think that's important at all times. What I do is that I try to learn new things all the time. As you get older, it's harder to learn radically new things, but I read a lot, watch TED Talks, and it is important to be exposed to different ideas even some that, you think, I will not agree with that. It's good to listen to well-reasoned ideas, even if you would think you wouldn't naturally agree. The outcome of doing that is that you may end up stronger in your conviction that they are wrong, having listened to the arguments, or you may have the revelation that maybe there are aspects you didn't consider, and they might be right sometimes. And so both are very useful things. So conclusions. So I don't think there are any magic bullets. You should see what works for you and try to remain sane. I would say, as much as possible, try to find things you like or find an interesting angles in the thing you need to do. And one of the worst things that can happen is to only have chores. So if you have to find something that feels like a chore, finding an interesting side project or an interesting side angle to it may make it more bearable. Turning things into positive learning experiences, this is in some way easier, because even something that doesn't work out is a positive learning experience. A common saying in certain areas of management is that things like, if you never fail, you're not trying enough, or the key to success is failing fast. I don't know that these are all good ideas necessarily, particularly if you work with a multi-billion-dollar spacecraft. But certainly there are things that one can learn from failure. And another very personal angle, most of you may disagree, but I find that my life improves when I am not on social media. In general, it's unlikely that you become a better person in 100 characters or less, but I have some evidence. When I was in the office, sometimes you have a gap of 5 minutes or 10 minutes in between meetings. I hope you're not hearing the phone ringing. And so I would maybe check out the professional Facebook groups that we have, or Twitter. And I was not always in a better mood after doing that check than I was before. Now that I'm in work from home, if I have a 10-minute gap, I'll go upstairs and make a cup of tea and ignore the social media, and I find that I'm much more relaxed in that way. And I think that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I've gathered a lot of useful tips, and you presented a lot of good points. And I have a couple of questions for you. So I remember you mentioned that programming skills are very important to work at the Space Telescope. And a lot of engineering companies, they do require you to have programming languages. So what programming languages do you think are the most useful for the job that you do, or for Space Telescope in general?
So nowadays we are doing most of our development in Python, which of course is not the language that I grew up with. I was using Fortran and C or C++ if I wanted to be really modern. But there are also more niche languages that in certain areas are used. Like there are people that use MATLAB because for what they are doing, it's really the way to go. I've known people that use Mathematica, again, for something, a different type of thing. So certainly being at ease with more than one is a good thing, but which specific one depends a lot on your specific field and interest. we have obviously people that do a lot of finite element analysis. And in fact, with the James Webb Space Telescope, we had to work with some of the companies because we were breaking their element limit. So we had to work with them to develop a more powerful version of their software. So clearly those are used as well.
Okay. The other question is, do you have any current project right now that you're working on? And if you do, what challenges have you encountered during that project?
The James Webb Space Telescope is the one that obviously has had a lot of challenges. Now, we are in charge of developing the flight and science operations, not so much the building the hardware. The hardware is being built in Northrop Grumman. We are the ones that we have the flight operations team, which is the engineers that send the commands to the spacecraft. And we have done some tests where even from Baltimore you command the spacecraft in California in some tests, and ultimately we'll do it on orbit. So that is very complex and had all kinds of possible challenges. I've had less time to do my own science, the galaxy science, but as a member of the science working group, I have guaranteed time on the James Webb. So I have science projects that I'm planning to once the telescope is up.
Okay, thank you. Another question. So if, for example, a student applies for an internship or work position at a space telescope, what are the main criteria usually people are looking for in order to hire that student or accept that student for a position?
I think I haven't been part of the selection process in some time. I think it's reasonably selective, so it's not the easiest thing to get in. There are certainly they are looking a lot to the diversity angle of the applicant pool. We want a variety of backgrounds, so there isn't a single profile that fits. But they're looking at people that have interest in astronomy, people that have interest in engineering from a variety of backgrounds. I would say the major limiting factor in certain areas would be these ITAR, EAR restrictions, because for a summer studentship, for instance, it wouldn't be worth doing the paperwork because it takes often few months to get it through, and the summer studentship lasts 2 months. So, but there are longer internships that are explored. So.
Okay, thank you. And the last question that I have from me is, when do usually, the hiring season usually opens for a space telescope?
There isn't really a hiring season. The only area where there is an hiring season is for the astronomers. Because there is a season for the academic jobs in universities. And so when we look for people that are astronomers, we have to be in sync, or we try to be in sync with that season, which is normally, deadlines in October, November, and offers in the spring. And so we do that both at the postdoctoral level or for more senior, staff jobs. For everything else, when we have an opening, we advertise it. And so there isn't a real season for that.
Okay, thank you very much for answering all of the questions. I don't know if any guests have any more questions. I'm going to check the chat.
Yeah, actually, I have a question, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
So you mentioned, I know that because I've done, hi, sorry, go ahead. My name is Garching, and I'm an undergrad in AE, graduating in the spring. And like you guys have mentioned earlier, it's like pretty difficult to find a job in like the U.S. aerospace industry given like all the ITAR restrictions. And so I've taken on a computer science minor, trying to, you know, go through that route to resolve some immigration status issues, and then try to find a job in aerospace later on. And just like out of curiosity, I know there's like a lot of work being done, or like a lot of research have been made possible because of like the recent advances in computing powers, like cluster computers and stuff like that. And I was just wondering if you guys work with anything in that area when you do your analysis and things.
We started with the first product that was on the cloud was an exposure time calculator. This is a piece of software that allows somebody who is interested in using the James Webb to put in the parameters, the characteristics of the object they are interested in, and tells them how long they need to look at it, how much they need to integrate. And so that, because of the complexity of James Webb, was pretty calculation intensive, so we decided to host it on the Amazon cloud in order to get the required scalability. And this is heavily used right now because the deadline for our first round of proposals is approaching on November 24th. So that was our first use, extensive use of the cloud. There are efforts on Hubble, and there is, in fact, now on the Hubble Space Telescope, there are archival proposals, so-called, where you can get funding to analyze data that have already been taken. And so they use data in the archive. And there is a category of archival proposal that is based on doing massive analysis on the cloud, things that wouldn't be possible in a traditional environment. So we are more and more moving into that world. The next space telescope that is developed, Roman, which used to be called WFIRST, has a very large field of view, and the data volume for that would be essentially not practical to deal with in the traditional old-style approach. So we need to use cloud computing in order to analyze the data from Roman, and probably will move in that direction also with the others. But it is less of a driver for the others, but it is a natural direction to go. I don't know if I answered the question.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I was curious as to see like how much it's being used in aerospace applications.
Is there any more questions that anyone has? Well, it seems like it's not. Well, I want to say a big thank you to Dr. Stiavelli for your presentation. You did a great job, and I'm very, very glad having you here and that you contributed to our project.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me, and have a nice weekend.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.